My name is Gavin Mounsey. I'm an author, regenerative garden designer, and lifelong apprentice to Mother Nature. I'm here today to talk about the last few ancient primary forests that are left in Canada. Now, some of the most productive forests, some of the most ancient trees that are providing the most biodiversity, the most medicinal compounds, and the most inspiration for the senses and for opportunities to learn from nature exist on the west coast. That's what's left on Vancouver Island, now less than 2% of the original primary old-growth forest. Now, as we speak right now, the BC government and corporations like Teal Jones and Western Forest Products are targeting one of the last few watersheds that is intact on the island. In the upper Wallabrown Valley right now, Western Forest Products has been moving in with their gear with the help of the BC government that's made promises that they're going to stop cutting the old growth, but they're still profiting from those stumpage fees. And so they are going in hard, and they are trying to remove the indigenous people that have been caring for that land since time immemorial. The fact that those forests existed here when we arrived here as Europeans is a testament to their stewardship of those forests. They had the ability to cut down the trees. They only cut down what they needed, not what they wanted, not for greed. Now that's what we've been doing now for over 100 years in Canada, and if we don't stop now, there's going to be nothing left for future generations. I was just in the Fairy Creek Valley with my family and my wife, and because of thousands of people standing up for those trees, that valley still exists. It's an extremely rare watershed valley in southwestern Vancouver Island, where the entire primary ancient forest is intact in that watershed. Now, I went into the heart of that valley. I saw the symbiosis that was taking place between the 1,000-year-old western cedars and the hemlock. I saw them having a symbiosis with the blueberries and the huckleberries. That land was producing copious amounts of food, and there was such a diverse array of different beings that were living there, from bear dens directly under 1,000-year-old cedars that are carrying the salmon up from the river, fertilizing the forest and allowing those trees to get that big, to the heron, to the signs of wolverines, to the elk that we saw up there. So many beings call that place home, and they have nowhere else to live in BC because we have chopped down the majority of the primary forests. Now, within that watershed, what I saw was a model that we can learn from for our food production systems. So I was in there researching for my next book. I'm going to be writing an in-depth article about Fairy Creek and what I learned there. I'm going to be sharing photos and how we can learn from that situation for producing our food and for even designing different aspects of our society. But for now, I'll share with you a few key points I learned while I was in the ancient forest watershed of Fairy Creek. 1. Those ancient trees have a symbiotic relationship with the ocean, and they are critically important for salmon habitat and kelp forests. Now, if you understand the importance of kelp forests in the context of production of the Earth's oxygen and the maintenance of the carbon cycle and all the other ocean life that depend on those kelp forests, you're going to understand how important it is to keep those ancient forests intact. Now, from a purely selfish human standpoint, if you want salmon, you need ancient forests. Now, what biologists learned recently is that ancient trees, as they drop their leaf litter and as they protect the waterways, they create a system that is carrying iron down from the earth into the ocean estuaries and seeding the phytoplankton, seeding the kelp forests, and becoming the foundation of ocean life. This becomes the foundation for salmon that then can come back upstream and are then carried inland by the hawks, by the eagles, by the bears, and the heron to allow those trees to get to the size that they did. Because without those ocean minerals of phosphorus and calcium, those trees can't get to the size that they did. So there's an intricate connection between those forests. Now, the people in what's now called Ireland and England learned the lesson the hard way when they chopped down all the ancient oak forests centuries ago, and now the streams and rivers no longer have the protection of the trees. They no longer have the nourishment of the iron given to the ocean, and their salmon stocks are plummeting. So one of the things we have to understand that if we chop down these ancient tree watersheds like the Wallabrown Valley, like Fairy Creek Valley, we are crippling the mineral cycle that goes to the ocean that becomes the salmon run that comes back up to us. Secondarily, another thing I learned in Fairy Creek is that I saw evidence of fire in that valley multiple times on 1,000-year-old trees, happening on different layers from 5 feet up to 20 feet up, happening a range from decades ago to centuries ago. I could see the scars in the bark. I could see where the lightning struck a small tree. I could see where it sparked up through the small trees. It burned for maybe 100 feet, 200 feet, and then because of the spacing of those ancient trees and the thickness of their bark and the amount of moisture they retain and the moss and lichen on their branches, they put out those forest fires. And they put out the forest fires while allowing the biochar, the charcoal from the smaller burned trees, to become enriched into the soil. So when I looked in the soil there in Fairy Creek, I found charcoal that was activated with biological organisms, becoming the foundation for these ancient trees to be able to retain moisture, to be able to grow to the size that they do. So when you take down those trees, you don't only cripple the salmon habitat, you also cripple the forest fire resilience of those forests. Now, a lot of people in BC hear about forest fires and wildfires, but if you do some very simple research and you cross-reference the places where these forest fires start and where they get out of control and where it's been clear-cut, you will find that over 90% of the fires that grow out of control in BC and elsewhere are in places that are actually replanted logging plantation areas. So these are not forests and these are not wilderness places anymore. These are monocultures planted of one species or a single grouping of species of trees. And because they're planted so closely together and are all the same age, they are susceptible to catastrophic fire. So these are man-made forest fires not by arsonists, but by the logging corporations that are chopping down the ancient forests that are forest fire resistant and replacing them with trees of all the same age and all the same species. So we need to protect these last few ancient forests for multiple reasons: for salmon habitat, for forest fire resilience, for learning for our food systems, and for future generations to be able to see the awe and beauty that we experienced. I don't want to be talking to my grandchildren one day and for them to ask me, when the last of the ancient forests came down, what were you doing? What did you do to stop it? I want to be able to tell them that I did everything in my ability to preserve these forests for future generations. But if we don't preserve these last few intact ecosystems on the scale of a watershed, we don't have the model that, whether you want to say creator or God intended, or you want to say that evolution took these millions of years to achieve. This is the pinnacle of all of the symbiosis of nature expressed in a peak ecosystem, a climax forest ecosystem. All the symbiosis there, the layers that are taking place, they can offer us much wisdom for how we grow food and how we interact with nature around us. But if we get rid of it, if we allow the greed to overtake us, we allow our passivity and our apathy to not take action, these forests will be gone for future generations. So right now, the BC government is trying to sue the elder Bill Jones of the Pacheedaht Nation for trying to stand peacefully to ask for these forests to be protected on his own sovereign territory. Now I'm asking for you to go to the description section where you can see a link to where I've written an article about what's at stake with these last few primary forests and how you can help support them, and share this out on your social media, because nefarious actions like this to target the last few remaining primary watersheds can only go on in the dark, because the people who are involved in it are cockroaches, to be honest. You can't target the last few primary old growths when there's so much second and third growth at this point late in the game. There's been forests regrowing for hundreds of years now, whether naturally or planted. So there's forests for all the lumber needs that we need without cutting the last few primary old growths. The reason they're targeting that is because they're making that much more profit from it. So there is no losing the jobs for logging families by not cutting these last few primary blocks. This is all about greed from the government and the corporations. We need to call it out for what it is. We need to protect what's left for future generations. Check out the description section for more information.
However, despite growing up here on Vancouver Island, I, like most people, didn't encounter trees like these. So where did they all go? Well, the dark green on this map represents the original extent of productive old-growth forests across Vancouver Island around the time of European colonization. Productive old-growth forests being those capable of growing big trees like the ones you see in many of my photographs. And to early settlers, it would have appeared as though you could never run out. However, this shocking time-lapse shows just how widespread the impacts of old-growth logging have been over the past 150 years. Today, after more than a century of industrial logging, we've lost over 80% of the productive old-growth forests across BC, including well over 90% of the valley bottoms where the biggest trees grow and the richest biodiversity resides. And old-growth logging, it's not a thing of the past. In fact, on average, over the past 5 years, more than 300 football fields worth of old-growth forests are still cut down across the province every single day, never to be seen again.
Large-scale industrial logging of old-growth forests in British Columbia is happening right now. It's not something of the past. BC's old-growth trees are some of the biggest and oldest living organisms that have ever existed in Earth's history, with trees second only to the US redwoods in grandeur. To come across some of the most endangered stands of these very scarce forest giants and to cut them down, today is like coming across a herd of elephants and slaughtering them all for their ivory. It's an outdated practice, it's not supported by the vast majority of British Columbians, and it's not justifiable considering that there's already a second growth alternative that dominates the landscape of most of southern British Columbia.
Groves like the one we're in today, the Eden Grove near Port Renfrew, have become so extremely rare and are also the areas that are most targeted by the logging industry. Oftentimes we arrive only to find that the area has already been surveyed for logging, or worse, the trees have been cut down and it's simply a sea of giant stumps. These are ecosystems that evolve over thousands of years. These trees can be also just as old. Yet, in a matter of days or weeks, a forest like the one we're standing in today can be cut down, never to be seen again in the same way.
Protecting forests isn't kind of a kumbaya nature freak imperative. The carbon, the water cycle, the effect on climate, the negative effects of degradation of forests in terms of floods and fires literally affect our lives. Forests are beautiful, and for that reason alone, we should maintain them. But they perform a function, they evolved for a purpose, because they actually make life livable on Earth.
We worked like around the clock to save these areas, and I realized right away with the Wilderness Committee that we had to do education. Many people said, oh, they don't have very much biodiversity in anything. And this one zoologist came to us and said, well, I think there's a lot of diversity way up in the forest. So we went in the Carmana Valley and built some platforms way up in the canopy. And he found like literally hundreds of new species of insects. You get out walking there and you start walking quite a distance to it, and it really isn't quite like they say. Every place is really unique. So it is way richer, and we are just squandering and ruining the planet.
As a result of the structural complexity of old-growth forests, you have a whole bunch of old-growth associated species. The marbled murrelet seabird, which nests only in the old-growth canopies, the spotted owl, the mountain caribou, which lives in the inland rainforest of British Columbia.
And so if we want to protect habitat for these species, then we have to protect watersheds, we have to protect larger blocks of old-growth forests, and not just a few hectares here and a few hectares there. I don't think we should consider logging old-growth forests on British Columbia's coast as sustainable resource management.
We look at the ancient cedar forests as an indicator species for the well-being of our society. Tribal parks are a modern-day application of our natural laws, the laws of our ancestors, in terms of what are our responsibilities to the future generations coming behind us.
I think it's really exciting that our chiefs and our community are willing to step up and be global leaders of conservation. In order to achieve long-term conservation success, we need to invest in the well-being of people that are deeply connected to place, people who have cultures that are deeply tied to place. We need new ways of doing things. By reflecting on our traditions and our cultures and elevating our principles and values at the decision-making table.
The government of British Columbia has indicated that they would be interested in discussing the concept of revising the Vancouver Island land use plan. But each year we log 9,000 or 10,000 hectares of old-growth forests on Vancouver Island. If we carry on at this rate and we don't start looking seriously at the current land use plan for another 5 years or more, there's not going to be an awful lot to make decisions about. We have to avoid a situation where we talk and log.
This tree would have been more than 500 years old before it was cut down on the west coast of Vancouver Island, British Columbia. And I still find this image as haunting today as I did back then. And standing there in the rain, I felt sick to my stomach at what I saw around me. I thought, how could an incredible rainforest be allowed to be turned into a scene of such devastation? And in the age of social media, why weren't more people documenting and sharing images of both these forests' beauty and their destruction? I was 25 years old then when I decided to dedicate my life to photographing old-growth forests to help see them saved, co-founding the Ancient Forests Alliance, which today is BC's leading organization working for the protection of old-growth forests. And for those who are unfamiliar, BC is home to some of the world's finest remaining old-growth temperate rainforests. These forests were globally rare to begin with, and today, sadly, most have since been lost. But where they remain, they're home to unique and endangered species and are among the best carbon storehouses of any terrestrial ecosystem on the planet. And stepping into an old-growth forest is like stepping back in time. Your heart rate slows, your blood pressure drops, and your senses come alive. As the light cascades in through the forest canopy, you're surrounded by a million shades of green and gold. The ground is soft and spongy beneath your feet, and the sounds of birds and creeks gently filter through the forest. It's a place of peace and tranquility. And hidden amongst these incredible landscapes are also some of the largest and oldest living organisms on the planet. Trees here can grow to be as wide as a living room, as tall as a downtown skyscraper, and live to be more than 1,000 years old. In fact, some of these trees would have already been 500 years old when Shakespeare was writing his plays, and others predate the signing of the Magna Carta. And it's humbling to stand before these gentle giants. Giants like this one, a western red cedar on Flores Island in a Howsett territory, the largest tree I've ever found. And this is what that looks like. So why does this matter? We often hear that forests are a renewable resource and that logging is done sustainably. We're told that the industry plants 2 trees for every 1 that it cuts down. But the question here isn't whether trees grow back, as they generally do. The question is, do the ensuing second growth tree plantations adequately replicate the old growth forests that they're replacing? And the answer is, they don't. Old growth forests are highly complex ecosystems that have evolved over centuries to even millennia. They're home to endangered species, such as the marble murrelet, spotted owl, and mountain caribou, which depend on them for their survival. They filter clean water for communities and wild salmon. They're pillars of a multi-billion-dollar tourism industry, and they're an integral part of many First Nations cultures that have evolved in old growth forests since time immemorial. In stark contrast, second growth tree plantations may look green on the outside, but are often brown and barren on the inside. This is due to their dense canopies, which shade out most of the sunlight from reaching the forest floor. And these tree farms, they lack the structural complexity that are found in old growth forests that many species depend upon. And these young forests are also typically relogged every 50 to 60 years, never to become old growth again. And beyond the environmental impacts, this large-scale conversion of old-growth forests into second-growth tree plantations contributes to the concept of generational amnesia, the idea that each new generation inherits a world that's much different than the one that came before it, but comes to accept it as the new normal. Often, the only evidence of the once grand forest that existed here are the monumental stumps that are hidden amongst the hillsides. So how do we combat this amnesia? And how do we remind people that in some cases, these ancient forests still exist and they need our help to protect them? These forests, they fill me with a sense of reverence and respect. And like an old friend, I've come to visit many of them time and time again. And having survived for hundreds, if not thousands of years, you expect them to be there when you return. Except many times, they aren't. Far too often, I've had to witness the gut-wrenching loss of a forest that can never be replaced. A forest that would have been home to innumerable species, some of which science would have yet to have a chance to identify. Forests so grand that I would think, surely this one is too beautiful, too special to be destroyed. But time and time again, I've learned that the appetite of industry knows no bounds, and that without real, firm protections, ancient forests will continue to fall. Forests like this one of my favorites in the Caycuse Valley in Dididat territory on Vancouver Island. And as I stood there that day, on the edge of existence, behind this tree lay the chainsaw that would cut it down the very next day. And since the fate of this forest was sadly all but sealed, I decided to capture these trees' final portraits. Because despite having just recorded the hottest year on record, with mega fires and floods sweeping across our country and the rest of the world, right here in Canada, the destruction of old-growth forests, which are our best natural defenses against these issues, is still taking place at alarming rates.
So I'd be grateful if you could check out the link in the description section and do what you can to support the forest defenders who are now standing up to protect these forests for future generations. Thank you.
For Monday Madness, we're setting up tree sits in old growth that is flagged to fall. Old growth doesn't really exist in Europe. I love the lichen and the mosses growing everywhere. So many different types of life, and it's just crazy that it still exists, and it's so worth to protect it. I came here all the way from the Netherlands, and I'm here to protect the forest.